The main thing I want to look at is the fact that in this beautiful collage work, you have your text pretty close to the edges of the pages, right? There's not a lot of space here, especially here. This little chunk right there. Here, here. You've got up here. It's pretty tight. So what I want to do is just demo how I would approach getting this so that you have enough space around the edge and you have bleed, so that when you actually get it printed and trimmed, it's not going to cut off anything that you don't want it to. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make a new file. So in Photoshop, new file, and remember the page spreads, the individual pages are 5 by 7. So if we put a 2-page spread together, we're going to have 10 inches wide, right, by 7 inches tall. So 5 inches wide, times 2 pages is going to be 10 wide and 7 tall. 300 DPI is what we want. We definitely want RGB color mode for now. Everything looks okay. I'm gonna hit yes. Great. So in here, I'm gonna create a guide for the center where the gutter is. You can see it's 5 inches right in the middle. Now here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna bring this in and cool. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of centering this in here, and I'm paying attention to the little spaces like here and here. So the issue is that this is just showing the trim size. This is just showing the 5-inch or the 10-inch wide spread by the 7-inch height page, and that's how it's going to be in its final form. Like holding it, it's going to be 10 inches wide, 7 inches tall. So here's what I want to highlight is making sure we have enough bleed so that you don't end up with like a weird ugly little like white rectangle around the edge, So I'm going to create guides that go along the edge like this. And again, this is the 10 inches wide by 7 inches tall. Okay. Now I'm going to expand the canvas out to give that extra bleed. So image at the top in your menu bar, image, and then canvas size. You can also do I think you can hold Control Alt C in order to bring that up. So yeah, canvas size, again, image up here in the menu bar, canvas size. Now here we want this relative box checked, and relative just means that whatever we type in here, it's going to be like adding on top of what we already have in our canvas. So if I want a 1/4 inch bleed all the way around, that's a total of a 1/2 inch, including the left and right and then the top and the bottom. So the width is going to be a total of a 1/2 inch extra, right? The height will be a total of an extra 1/2 inch. So that means that we'll get a 1/4 inch on around all sides, right? Because we have left and right for the width, and we have top and bottom for the height. So this needs to be 0.5 for both the width and height. And make sure this little thing is in the center. We don't want it like this. We want it in the center. We want to make sure this is set to relative. So when we hit OK, see how it added that extra 1/4 inch all the way around. So to go up to the ruler, you can see, this right here is a 1/4 inch. This right here is a 1/4 inch. All right, so now we're going to look at those guides and say, if that's the trim, this guide here is the trim, man, that text is really close to the edge. So can I maybe scale this down to bring it a little closer, or sorry, give it a little bit more margin. But once I do that, I'm realizing that I don't really have any extra bleed, right? the page here that you collage together doesn't really have much extra bleed. You do have some up here, which is nice. You've got definitely some down here, which is great. But over on the left and right and up here, we're really missing that bleed. So here's what I want to recommend. You can do something where you could use like the marquee tool, and I'm going to show you what you might want to just try. Grab all this stuff right here, okay, and then Control J will duplicate that little slice, right? So we just have this little slice here. And what I might do is say, can we move this over something like that, right? I could grab the edge here and I can hold shift and kind of stretch it that way if I wanted to, something like that. So the idea here, even though it looks weird on the edge, the idea is that if the print gets shifted, when it's getting printed, when it comes time to trim it, you're going to have more of the image continuing, at least just generally it's kind of continuing. And so you're not gonna end up with like this kind of weird white space around the edges. So we can repeat that here. Maybe something like this. Again, I'm on this layer, your art layer. Control J to duplicate it, and that just makes that little slice. And I could bring it up here like this, move that there, and maybe I do the transform tool and I hold shift to kind of stretch it, something like that. So again, it has a weird seam right here, right? So if you want, you can try to kind of line it up, but it's going to be a little funky, right? But it's better than having just a weird blank edge, the possibility of a weird like white line around the edges of your pages. So again, the whole idea of like creating the art with the bleed in mind is to avoid having to do this process of like adding the bleed afterwards, because it can be really tedious and pretty headachy. So the idea is like ideally you would have created your artwork with the imagery continuing. Let me grab a darker color. You would have already created your collage imagery so that it continues into this space, right? So imagine instead of this like goopy blobby gray paint, that was actually just your collage imagery extending beyond that 10 inches wide, 7 inches tall, right? It should extend beyond it so that when it comes time to print and trim the bleed, we don't have to worry about having this like gap, this gap of white around any of the edges or corners or anything like that. So if you wanted to touch up this stuff a little bit just to kind of go the extra mile, you could. Something like this. What I like to use for that is here you have the spot healing brush tool. Actually, there might be a better one. Healing brush. Healing brush is it. So here, you got a little band-aid healing brush tool. So when we're using this tool, we want to say sample up here in the properties bar. We want to say sample all the layers. Okay. And on a new layer, a new fresh layer above everything else, this is weird. Actually, I think I goofed up. It's the clone stamp tool. That's what I want, the clone stamp tool. So this, you'll see what happens. Sample all layers for the clone stamp. All layers. And when I hold Option, I think it's Option on a PC. On a Mac, I hold Option. I hold Option and I can click a point where I say I want to start sampling from like here, this little spot. So hold Option, I click, then I let go of Alt, and what I can do is I can change the size of the brush and I can paint, and what it's doing is painting, it's repainting the area from the area that I pulled from. So watch this, if I grab like the % sign, so I'm using that stamp tool, I hold Alt right here, sorry, I hold Option right here, click, and I go over here, expand my brush, I can paint from this area, right? See that? So you can see that if you go to the clock, right? Here's the clock, then I go over here, and I can start painting with the clock, right? So it's cloning, right? It's cloning that area, but you're doing it with a brush to kind of manually paint that in. So that's what you could do to like clean up some of this stuff, some of this weird stuff. You could say, you know, I want to clean up this weird edge here, so I might grab a little, make that brush size smaller. Clone stamp tool is S. Tap S to get to that. Hold Alt. I can click here, and then I can kind of click, just really lightly kind of touch that up to make it softer. Maybe I go here and I get rid of this stuff. Alright. If I wanted to. But again, keep in mind this stuff generally will be cut off, right? So it's not super crazy important to do all this. But it can just be going the extra mile to make sure things are really clean and presentable. So, you know, you could grab a spot like right here and say I want to continue that like right here. Right, something like that. Just to kind of soften up that hard edge from that little splice we took. See how that's like starting to copy this part? I don't want that, right? So I can grab this little piece and maybe go like here, paint that. That's getting weird. So you got, it's like holding Option to sample a little area, Option click, and then you can kind of paint to kind of clean up some of that stuff, those weird edges. You could do it here, maybe like this, just to touch it up just a little bit so it doesn't have that super hard edge. Again, holding Alt to sample, or sorry, keep saying Alt, Option, holding Option to sample that spot, and then clicking where you want to kind of clean stuff up a little bit. So now, like this little bit right here, I say, I want to make sure that's not there, that little white chunk. So Option, click, and then paint that, and just kind of clean it up, copying from this area, which is similar. So this is definitely looking better as far as making sure we have extra bleed around this left side. You know, this area over on the right, we got to do some work there, right? So maybe we can do our stamp tool, hold Option, maybe like here, move over, expand that out, right? And you can see it's just kind of copying, but once we get up to here, it's going to start copying that little piece of that text right here. See? So that's where we say, I don't want it to do that. You know, I might want to be more careful. Click this little chunk, expand that. I'm going to hide those guides. Click here. And I know this is like super tedious, but it's something we can do to just go the extra mile and make sure we have good bleed around the edges. But we can avoid all this extra tedious work if we just start with making sure we have that extra bleed around all the edges. Right. Click here. See that? So we want to click here and say, I'm going to... So this is like nitty gritty Photoshop editing stuff, like photo retouching stuff. If you ever have to do like photo retouching for branding, materials, you know, for like corporate ads of photos, and you have to like touch up photos or remove backgrounds or do really kind of weird, like tedious image or photo editing stuff. This is a tool that you're going to use a good bit of to do that type of work. I could click here, hold Option, click here, and see how you can kind of line that up to continue that diagonal shape. And we go like right there. All right, see that? Grab this. So it's gonna be a little weird, and if a graphic design photo retouching expert sees this, they're gonna know, oh, it looks like you kind of touched that up with the clone stamp tool. But the average viewer is not gonna notice at all, especially once that likely will get mostly cut off in the final printed form. So so this is over here on the left, the right, it's looking better. This needs to get cleaned up down here. So maybe hide those guides. Again, using that stamp tool. Sometimes you can just pick a dark color, like if it looks like it's a really dark, kind of even area of value, you could just kind of paint like that. Something like that, kind of soften it up. So then, excuse me, I need coffee, water, or something. So again, what we did is we added that extra darkness so that we don't have this like big, nasty white blank gap, right? So that's looking much better as far as getting it ready to print. We still have the issue of like some of this text is pretty close to the edge, so that's like something to be cautious about. Things could get printed, and then when it gets printed, it might actually end up like getting trimmed so that the trim line is like, I'll just do an example, like it might get trimmed like this, to where the text is really close to the edge of the page like that. You know, you hope that it'll get trimmed like that, but I just want you to be aware that we got to be careful about these edges. All right, I think that about covers it. So sorry that was kind of long. I just wanted to really unpack all that and make sure like you know how to proceed accordingly, and work smarter, not harder.